She was 8 months pregnant, hanging off a bridge, begging for help. Her mother-in-law walked over slowly, looked her in the eye, and with a
Help me,
cold
please.
smile whispered,
Don't let go.
"You were never good enough for my son," a cleaning
It's too
woman's
late
daughter
for
from
that.
nowhere with nothing. And when Catherina
Help
begged
me,
her to think of the
please.
baby,
Don't let
Moon-Seok
go.
simply opened her hand and let go.
It's
40
too
feet
late for that.
below, a truck was moving, and it never stopped. Hey, if this is your first time here, welcome, and I'm so glad you found this channel.
Help
Drop
me,
in the
please.
comments
Don't
where
let
and what
go.
time you're watching from. I genuinely love
It's too
seeing
late
where you
for
all
that.
are. And if you're not subscribed yet, please do that now, because this story
me,
is going to
please.
places you are
Don't
not
let
expecting.
go.
Okay, let's keep going. Catherina Ndlovu grew up knowing two things: that her family had nothing, and that she was going to change that. Not in a movie way, not in a rags to riches overnight way. In the real, hard, unglamorous way where you study until your eyes burn and you eat whatever is cheapest and you tell yourself, just keep going, even when nothing is moving. Her mother cleaned offices in Durban. Her father had passed when she was 9. Her younger brother Saifo shared a bedroom with her until she left for university. And even then, they were still splitting everything: her scholarship money, the small income her mother brought in, whatever their aunt could spare at the end of the month. But Catherina was brilliant, not just smart, brilliant, the kind of student whose professors remembered her name years later. She got into the University of Cape Town on a partial scholarship and studied cybersecurity with the kind of focus that comes from knowing you cannot afford to waste a single opportunity. She graduated, top of her class, certificate in hand, heart full of hope. Then came the silence. Application after application, company after company. She applied everywhere in South Africa first: banks, tech firms, government contracts, rejection emails, or worse, nothing at all. She made a spreadsheet just to track them. By month 4, she had over 90 entries, 3 interviews, 0 offers. The bills didn't care. The landlord didn't care. Her mother's knees were getting worse, and she was still on her feet 5 days a week, scrubbing floors so Saifo could have school shoes that fit. Catherina started skipping lunch. Not always, but enough. She told her mother she was watching her diet. Her mother knew. Neither of them said it out loud. It was on a Wednesday night, almost midnight, electricity running low on the meter, that she opened her laptop one more time and sent a long-shot application to Haesung Cybernetics in Seoul, South Korea. She'd seen their listing before and ignored it because it felt too far, too foreign, too impossible. But that night, something made her try. She filled in every section carefully, uploaded her portfolio, wrote a cover letter that took her 2 hours. Then she closed the laptop and went to sleep, telling herself not to hope too much. 6 weeks later, an email arrived. "Dear Miss Ndlovu, we are pleased to invite you for a preliminary interview with our cybersecurity division." She read it 4 times. Then she called her mother. Her mother screamed so loud Saifo thought something was wrong. Getting to Korea was its own battle. The flight money came from 3 places: her mother's small savings, a loan from their church, and Catherina selling her laptop and borrowing her cousin's old one. She packed 1 carry-on bag, 2 pairs of shoes. She had enough money for maybe 2 weeks if she was extremely careful. She landed at Incheon International Airport, exhausted, disoriented, and quietly terrified. The airport was massive, the kind of place that makes you feel like a small dot in a very large picture. Screens everywhere. Announcements in Korean she couldn't follow. People moving like they all knew exactly where they were going. She stood near the baggage carousel and tried to look calm. "You just landed from South Africa?" She turned. A man in a gray hoodie, carry-on bag over one shoulder, South African Airways luggage tag swinging from his wrist. Dark skin, easy smile, the kind of face that looked like it laughed often. "Tabo Makona," he said, extending his hand. Johannesburg sighed. You, Catherina, Durban. He nodded like that explained everything. First time in Seoul? Yes. You have somewhere to stay. She paused just a second too long. He tilted his head. Listen, I'm not being weird. My cousin lives here. She has a spare room. She's hosted people before. 2, maybe 3 weeks, no cost. After that you figure it out. She studied him. Her mother had raised her careful, but Thabo had this steadiness to him. Calm. No agenda. Just a fellow South African who understood exactly what it meant to land somewhere foreign with not enough in your pocket. Thank you, she said. Really? He waved it off. We look out for each other. Come. The interview was at Haesung Cybernetics 3 days later. 17 floors up, glass walls, a panel of 4 people who asked questions that came fast and technical. She answered every single one. Some she wasn't sure about, but she didn't freeze, didn't shrink. She got the call the next morning. She sat on the edge of the spare bed in Thabo's cousin's apartment, phone pressed to her ear, and did not cry until she hung up. Then she sat there for a while with her hands over her face, just breathing. She called her mother. Her mother cried. Saifo cheered in the background, even though he didn't fully understand what Haesung Cybernetics was. The job was not easy. Nobody said it would be, but still, her supervisor, Manager Kong Min-jae, was the kind of man who expected everything done right the first time and had very little patience for the process of getting there. He corrected her work in front of others. He set deadlines that made no sense, and then watched to see if she'd meet them. Once he looked at a report she'd spent 3 days on and said, flat and quiet, this is not enough. She went home that night, sat on the floor of her new tiny apartment in Mapogu, and stayed there for a while, not crying exactly, just still. Then she got up, made tea, opened the report, found every week's section, fixed them, came in early the next morning, and left the updated version on his desk before he arrived. He never said, well done, but he stopped correcting her in front of people. That was enough. She found her rhythm. Slowly, messily, but surely, she started picking up Korean from everywhere she could. The convenience store lady near her apartment, the subway announcements she listened to every morning, a free language app she used on her lunch break. She mispronounced things constantly. Once she accidentally told a coworker she was very hungry for the meeting when she meant she was very prepared. They laughed. She laughed too. She sent money home every month. Not much at first, then a little more, then more. Saifo started eating 3 proper meals again. She was not comfortable, not yet, but she was moving. And for Catherina and Ndlovu, moving was everything. Hey, if this is your first time here, welcome, and I'm so glad you found this channel. Drop in the comments where and time you're watching from. I genuinely love seeing where you all are. And if you're not subscribed yet, please do that now, because this story is going to places you are not expecting. Okay, let's keep going. It was a Thursday afternoon, end of a long shift, the kind that left her brain feeling like wet paper. Catherina took the longer route home, sometimes when she needed to decompress. Just walk, let the city noise wash over her, think about nothing important. That day she passed a block she didn't usually cut through. Older part of the neighborhood, quieter. A public phone booth on the corner, the old-fashioned kind with a scratched plastic door. She was going to walk past it. Then she saw him, a man face down on the pavement just beside the booth. She stopped. Her first thought was drunk, sleeping it off. Seoul had its share of that. Businessmen who missed the last train and sat wherever they landed. She looked around. Nobody else was stopping. She walked closer, nudged him with her foot. Nothing. She nudged harder. Still nothing. Something cold moved through her chest. She crouched, grabbed his shoulder, and turned him over. Her hands came back covered in blood. dark, heavy blood, not a cut, not a scrape, something serious, something that had been bleeding for a while. His face was pale in a way that scared her. His breathing was so shallow she had to watch his chest for several seconds just to confirm it was there. She grabbed her phone and dialed emergency services. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was not. She'd always been that way. Fall apart later. Handle it now. I need an ambulance. A man is unconscious, heavy bleeding, I don't know for how long. She gave the street name, described the phone booth, answered every question they asked. She pulled off her scarf and pressed it against the worst of the bleeding the way she half remembered from a first aid video she'd watched years ago for a university assignment. Stay with me, she told him, even though his eyes were closed. Help is coming. Just stay. The ambulance arrived in 6 minutes. Paramedics took over immediately, moving fast, talking to each other in rapid Korean she could only half follow. One of them looked at her, hand-soaked scarf ruined, and asked if she was injured. No, she said. I'm fine. He's the one who needs help. She gave her name and phone number to the officer, who arrived shortly after. Answered what she could. She didn't know the man, didn't know what happened. She just found him. She walked home in the cold, hands washed at a convenience store sink, and sat in her apartment for a long time that night without turning on the TV. She didn't know what had happened to that man. Not the full story. Not yet. What had actually happened, she would only learn this much later, was that Do Ha-jun had walked into the wrong meeting that evening. A territory dispute, old grudges between two rival groups in a part of Seoul that operated by its own rules. Ha-jun ran things that polite society didn't talk about openly. He was not a clean man, not in the way the world measured clean. But he was precise, and he was careful, and that night someone had broken the rules of engagement first. 2 shots. He took one in the side, one grazed his shoulder. He managed to get out, barely, and made it 2 blocks before his legs gave out near the phone booth. That was where Catherina found him. She didn't know any of that when she pressed her scarf against his side and told him help was coming. She was just a woman on her way home from work who decided not to walk past. 3 days later, Catherina was at the hospital, not as a patient, just following up something in her needing to know if the man had made it, when an older gentleman came down the corridor toward her. Silver hair, dark suit, the kind of posture that came from decades of being the most important person in every room he entered. He stopped when he saw her. "You are the woman who found my nephew," he said. Not a question. "Yes," she said. "Is he alive?" He exhaled the word like he'd been holding it for 3 days. "Alive, because of what you did." He introduced himself. Do Sungwon. He thanked her in the formal Korean way, a deep, deliberate bow, the kind that meant something real, not the polite, shallow nod people used for strangers. She stood very still, not sure how to respond, because nobody had ever bowed to her like that before. "You pressed on the wound," he said, straightening. "The doctor said another 20 minutes, and it would have been too late. You did that." She shook her head. "I just called for help." "You stayed," he said simply. "That is not nothing." He handed her a card. Heavy paper, clean, just a name and a number. Told her if she ever needed anything, please call. She thanked him. He bowed again, got into a waiting car, and was gone. She looked at the card for a moment. Then she put it in her wallet and went back to her life. Her life, honestly, was full enough to keep her busy. Work, eat, sleep, subway, repeat. Manager Kang Min-jae had not gotten any warmer, but she'd gotten better at reading him, knew which mornings he wanted updates, and which mornings you left reports on his desk, and said nothing. She'd figured out the rhythms of the office, the unspoken rules, who to eat lunch with, and who to smile at politely, and keep moving. Her Korean was getting better too. Not fluent, not even close, but functional, real functional, not just counting and greetings. She could hold a basic conversation now, without her phone. She could understand most of what was said around her even when people didn't know she was listening, which turned out to be very useful in an office environment. She called home every Sunday. Her mother asked the same 3 questions every time. Are you eating? Are you sleeping? Is there anyone? Catherina always said yes, yes. And Mama, can we not? Saifo always grabbed the phone at some point and talked too loud, and said very little of substance, and she loved him enormously for it. Tabo had become a proper friend by now. They met for food sometimes, vented about Korea, laughed about things only South Africans in Seoul would understand. He'd found a good job with a logistics company and was settled. It helped having one person nearby who knew where you came from without you having to explain it. Months passed. She stopped thinking about the man at the phone booth. Then one evening in February, she got off her shift late and walked to the bus stop 2 blocks from the office. She almost didn't see him at first. He was leaning against a black car parked just ahead, not the kind of leaning that looked casual, but the kind that said he'd been standing there a while, waiting deliberately. Dark coat, quiet eyes, hands in his pockets. He looked like someone who had learned to be still. She slowed down. He looked up and saw her, and something shifted in his expression. Not surprise, he'd clearly been expecting her, but something more like relief. Miss Ndlovu, he said. His English was careful, slightly accented. I'm sorry to appear like this. I asked around for your schedule. I know that sounds, he paused, strange. I just didn't know another way to find you. She stopped a few feet away. You're him, she said, from the phone booth. Yes. He straightened. Do Hajun. He looked different standing upright in proper light, more solid, more present. The scar along his jaw was visible now. His eyes were dark and direct, and when he looked at her, he didn't look away the way people sometimes did when they felt guilty about something. I owe you my life, he said. That is not an expression. That is a fact, and I would like, if you're willing, to thank you properly. Not just a card from my uncle. Me, in person, a proper dinner at my home. You can bring someone if that makes you more comfortable. She studied him. He waited, didn't push, just waited. What exactly do you do? She said slowly. That ends with you bleeding out next to a phone booth. He held her gaze. Something complicated, he said honestly. Something I won't lie to you about if you ask the right questions. She appreciated that more than she probably should have. She thought about it for a moment. This man, this strange situation, the card she'd carried in her wallet for months without knowing why she kept it. Okay, she said finally. Dinner. Once. He nodded. Once is enough. Thank you. She got on her bus. He watched it pull away, then got in his car. Moon-Seok, sitting in the driver's seat, glanced at him in the rearview mirror. Said nothing. Hajun said, Don't. Moon-Seok looked back at the road, but his eyes, even in the mirror, were already thinking something he wasn't saying out loud. The car ride to his house took 40 minutes. Moon-Seok drove. Hajun sat in the back with her, which she hadn't expected. She'd assumed he'd sit in front, do the whole powerful man in the back seat thing alone. But he sat beside her and pointed out things through the window as they left the city, a street market he liked, a bridge that looked different every season, a hill that turned completely gold in autumn. He talked like someone who actually loved where he lived. She watched him more than she watched the window. They turned off the main road eventually, through a gate that opened automatically up a long driveway lined with trees so tall and evenly spaced they looked intentional because they were. Everything here was intentional. Then the house came into view, and Catherina, who had promised herself she would not react, reacted. It wasn't a house. It was an estate, the kind you saw in magazines and assumed was a hotel. 3 full floors of pale stone, wide and sprawling, with large windows that caught the last of the evening light and threw it back warm and golden. A water feature ran along the left side of the entrance. Not flashy, just the sound of moving water, quiet and constant. Two stone lions sat at the base of the front steps, worn smooth with age, like they'd been there for generations. Inside was something else entirely. The entrance hall alone was bigger than her entire apartment. Marble floors, not the cold, sterile kind, but a warm cream shade with natural veining that made it feel almost alive. A staircase curved up on the right side, dark wood banister, the kind that looked handcrafted. Real paintings on the walls, not prints, not decorations, actual paintings with brushstrokes you could see from across the room. Fresh flowers on a console table by the door, white and simple, the kind someone changed regularly. Everything was clean, not hotel clean, home clean. Someone lived here and cared about it. A staff member, quiet, efficient, took her coat without being asked. "Please, make yourself comfortable," Ha-jun said. "I'll be back in a few minutes. I want to change out of this." He gestured vaguely at his coat and disappeared up the staircase. She stood in the middle of that entrance hall and turned slowly, taking it all in. A sitting room off to the left, deep sofas, a fireplace, bookshelves that went all the way to the ceiling, a corridor to the right that seemed to go on longer than made sense. Through a far doorway, the warm smell of something being cooked. She walked to the sitting room, sat down carefully on the edge of one of the sofas, the kind so soft it seemed to pull you in, and told herself to act normal. Ha-jun came back down 15 minutes later. And listen, she had seen him in his dark coat in the dim light outside the bus stop, leaning against his car. She had thought he was fine, sure, but that was before. He walked in wearing a simple white shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, dark trousers. Hair slightly damp, like he'd splashed water on his face. No jacket, no armor, nothing formal, just him. Broad shoulders she hadn't fully clocked before, the kind that came from actual physical work, not a gym for show. He moved through the room with a quietness that should have felt careful, but didn't. It felt natural, like a man completely at home in his own body. She looked back at the bookshelf. He sat across from her, leaned forward slightly with his elbows on his knees, and said in perfect, easy, completely unaccented English, "Thank you for coming. I know it wasn't a simple yes." She turned to look at him. "Your English," she said, "it's fluent." He smiled a little. "I went to university in Boston. 7 years in the States, total." A pause. "People assume I don't speak it well, because they don't ask." She shook her head slowly. "I had a whole plan for how I was going to manage the language barrier tonight." "I'm sorry to ruin it," he said, not sounding sorry at all. She laughed, and just like that, the stiffness in the room broke. Dinner was served in a smaller dining room. Not the grand formal one she'd glimpsed down the corridor, but a warmer space with a round table and wide windows that looked out over the back garden, lit softly in the evening. The food was Korean, but light, the kind that tasted like someone actually thought about what you might enjoy rather than what would impress you. They talked about that night. He asked her straight out, no preamble, "Why did you stop?" Most people would have kept walking. She thought about it honestly. "I nudged you with my foot first," she admitted. "I thought you were just sleeping it off." He raised an eyebrow. "You kicked me." "I nudged," she said firmly. "And when you didn't respond, I got scared. And then I couldn't walk away from someone who needed help. My mother used to say, if you pass someone who needs help and you do nothing, you carry that with you forever. She said it so many times, it's basically in my bones now." He was quiet for a moment. "Your mother sounds like someone worth listening to," he said. "She's the wisest person I know," Catherina said simply. "And she's never been outside of Durban, never had money, never had anything easy. But she raised us to show up for people. That's not nothing." Ha-jun looked at her the way people looked at something they hadn't expected. Not surprised exactly. More like recalibrating. No, he said quietly. That's not nothing at all. She asked him what happened that night. He told her, not everything, but enough. A meeting that went wrong. People who didn't honor agreements. He'd gotten out, but not cleanly. 2 blocks from his car, and his legs gave out. 2 shots, she said slowly. 2 shots, he confirmed. She stared at him. And you're just sitting here, having dinner. I heal fast, he said, with a straightness that somehow made it funnier. She shook her head. You are a very strange man. Hajun. Probably, he agreed. He invited her back the following weekend. She said maybe. He texted her Thursday to confirm. She said fine, yes, okay. The second time they went out, he took her to Gyeongbokgung Palace in the morning, the huge historic one in the center of Seoul, where the old royal buildings stretched out in rows and the stone courtyards felt like standing in a different century. He bought her a cup of sweet rice drink from a vendor near the entrance, and she wrapped both hands around it and decided it was one of the best things she'd ever tasted. You look like you're having a religious experience, he said. I might be, she said seriously. He laughed, really laughed, head back, no performance to it. She filed that away. A man who laughed like that when something was actually funny was someone you could trust a little. They walked the whole palace grounds. He knew the history, told her things the tour signs didn't say, small details about which kings had lived where, which buildings had burned and been rebuilt, what the courtyards were used for centuries ago. He wasn't showing off. He just knew things and shared them easily. She matched him, told him about the history of Cape Town, the castle there, what colonialism had done to the architecture of her city, how you could read the whole painful history of a place just by looking at what was built and what was torn down. He listened the way he always did, fully. The third time, he drove her to the coast, Sokcho, all the way north, 3 hours from Seoul. She asked if they could keep the windows down, and he said yes without hesitating, even though it was cold, and she saw him quietly pull his collar up and say nothing about it. They ate at a tiny seafood place, right on the water, plastic chairs, no ambience, incredible food. She ordered wrong, pointed at something that turned out to be extremely spicy, and her eyes started watering almost immediately, and she refused to admit it was too much. You okay? He asked, watching her. Perfectly fine, she said, reaching for water. You're crying a little. It's the sea air. He pressed his lips together. She could see him fighting it. Don't, she warned. He lasted 4 more seconds. Then he laughed so hard he had to put down his chopsticks, and she threw a paper napkin at him, and the old woman running the restaurant looked over at them with a fond expression, like she'd seen this exact thing 100 times. The 4th time, he showed up at her apartment building on a Saturday morning unannounced, holding 2 coffees and a small paper bag. Bunjiapang, he said when she opened the door, still in her house clothes, hair not done. You said you wanted to try proper street food. She stared at him. I said that a month ago. I know. She stood in the doorway looking at him for a moment. Then she took the coffee, stepped back, and let him in. They sat on her small balcony in their coats, eating fish-shaped pastries, watching the city below. He told her about growing up in this city, not the estate, not the power, but the small things. A ramen stall his uncle used to take him to after school, the specific subway line he knew better than any other, the neighborhood he'd lived in before everything got complicated. She told him about Durban, the beach at sunrise, her mother's cooking on Sundays, Sifo stealing her school supplies and blaming it on nobody. They talked for 3 hours without noticing the time. By December, she knew, not in a dramatic, lightning bolt way, in the slow, quiet way where you realize one morning that this person has become part of how you think about your days. She looked forward to his messages. She saved things to tell him, small things, funny things, things that happen at work that she knew would make him smile. She told Tabo first. Tabo put down his fork at the restaurant they were at and looked at her very directly. The man whose life you saved. Yes. The man with the estate and the bodyguard and the vague job description. Yes. Tabo picked his fork back up. Okay, he said simply. Is he good to you? Very, she said. Then okay, he said again. But I'm watching him. Ha-jun proposed in March. No crowd. No restaurant performance. They were parked outside her apartment after a late dinner, and he just turned to her, reached into his jacket, and held out a ring. Not enormous, not showy, a clean, beautiful thing that looked exactly like something she would have chosen herself. I know what I am, he said quietly. I know my life isn't simple, and I haven't told you everything, but I know who I am when I'm with you, and I want to keep being that man. She looked at the ring, then at him. Is the complicated part going to put me in danger? She asked. He was honest. I'm going to spend every day making sure it doesn't. She believed him. Maybe she shouldn't have. But she did, because she'd watched this man for months, in small moments and big ones, and he had never once been careless with her. Yes, she said. They married in April. Small, warm, intentional. Tabo was there. Sungwon sat in the front row and looked like a proud father. Moon-Seok stood at the back of the room, watching everything, which is what Moon-Seok did. Her mother was on a video call the entire ceremony, dressed in her best church blouse, crying from the opening song all the way to the end. Saifo grabbed the phone at some point and started giving Ha-jun a very serious thumbs up through the screen. It was the happiest day of her life. And then June arrived, and with it, news. 8 weeks pregnant, then 12, then 16. The morning sickness was brutal. She spent 2 weeks eating crackers and lying to Ha-jun that she was fine. He started leaving ginger tea on her nightstand before she woke up. He appeared one Tuesday evening with an entire watermelon because he'd read somewhere it helped with nausea. You researched this, she said. Maybe, he said, setting it on the counter like it was completely normal. The ultrasound at 20 weeks, said girl. Ha-jun went very quiet in the car afterward, holding her hand, not saying anything for a long stretch of road. Then, I want her to be brave like you. Catherina looked out the window. She will be, she said softly. She doesn't have a choice. Everything felt full, complete, like all the hard years had been building toward exactly this. But somewhere across the city, in a house even larger than Ha-jun's, a woman named Moon-Seok had just learned about her son's wife. And she was not crying happy tears. Moon-Seok found out on a Tuesday. She didn't hear it from Ha-jun. He hadn't called her in 3 weeks, which was already enough to make something cold settle in her chest. Her son had always been attentive. Weekly calls, monthly visits, always checking in. Then suddenly, nothing. Silence. She had people for situations like this. One phone call to the right person, and within 48 hours, she had a name. Catherina Ndlovu, South African, 27 years old, cybersecurity analyst at Haesung. Father deceased. Mother, a cleaning woman in Durban. Younger brother, still in school. No family wealth. No connections. No status. Moon-Seok sat in her sitting room, an enormous, immaculate room in a house that had hosted government officials and business dynasties, and read the report twice. Then she set it down on the table very carefully, the way you set something down when what you actually want to do is throw it. Her son, Du Ha-jun, who had been groomed since birth to carry the weight of everything she had built and protected, had gone and married a girl from nothing. She had already chosen someone for him. Yeo Rinjae, the only daughter of one of the wealthiest families in Seoul, educated abroad, elegant, connected. A match that would have doubled their influence and secured their name for another generation. All of that gone because of a girl from Durban with $47 and a carry-on bag. Moon-Seok picked up her phone and called her loyal maid, Madame Han Soo-yeon, who had been with her for 20 years and understood without being told what certain tones of voice meant. Find out everything, Moon-Seok said quietly. Everything. What Moon-Seok didn't know, couldn't have known, was that Catherina was in the kitchen when that call happened. Ha-jun was out. The house was quiet. She'd come downstairs for water, moving slowly the way you move at 8 months pregnant, when everything feels like it weighs twice as much. She passed the sitting room and heard her mother-in-law's voice carrying through the slightly open door. Sharp, low, deliberate. She heard her own name. She heard poor family. She heard cleaning woman. She heard not what I planned for him. She stood in the corridor for a moment, hand resting on her stomach, the baby shifting slowly inside her, and she made a decision right then to say nothing. Not to Ha-jun. Not yet. She didn't want to make him choose. She didn't want to be the reason for a fracture in his family before their daughter had even arrived. She went back upstairs, drank water from the bathroom tap, lay on her side, and stared at the wall for a long time. Just keep going, she told herself. Same thing she told herself at every hard point in her life. Just keep going. The maltreatment was quiet at first. That was the thing about Moon-Seok. She was not a crude woman. She didn't shout. She didn't make scenes. She was surgical. She started visiting more, always with gifts, always with that wide, warm smile that looked like love from a distance. But up close, in the small moments Ha-jun wasn't watching, something else leaked through. Comments about Catherina's cooking. Oh, don't worry, it's fine. It's just a different palate. Questions about her family asked in a tone that made the answers feel like a verdict. Suggestions about how she dressed, how she carried herself, what she should and shouldn't say at family gatherings. Small things, the kind that left no mark you could point to. Madame Han Soo-yeon was even quieter about it. A word here, a look there, things moved or misplaced in ways that were never quite provable. Catherina endured it, smiled, said yes, thank you, I'll keep that in mind. She was not weak. Anyone who knew her knew that. But she was pregnant. She was trying to keep peace. And she understood that in this family, in this world, she was still learning the terrain. Ha-jun noticed her getting quieter sometimes, asked if she was okay. She said, just tired. The baby is sitting on everything. He believed her because she said it so easily, and she hated lying to him. But she also wasn't ready. The vacation suggestion came in September. Moon-Seok arrived one afternoon with Madame Han and a folder, an actual folder, of printed itineraries for Jeju Island, Korea's most beautiful island, the kind of place people saved up for years to visit. Volcanic landscapes, coastal cliffs, waterfalls, air that smelled like the ocean and pine at the same time. I want us to have time together. Moon-Seok said, sitting across from Catherina, with that warm smile fully deployed. Properly, before the baby comes and everything changes. Just family, me, you, Uncle Cha Byung-ho and his wife, a few cousins. 10 days. Catherina looked at the itineraries. They were thorough, beautiful, even. Something in her said no, not loudly, just a quiet, persistent discomfort she couldn't name. But she thought about what it would mean to refuse, the narrative Moon-Seok would build, the wedge it would create, the way Ha-jun would look if he heard his wife had rejected his mother's gesture of peace. That sounds lovely, she said. Moon-Seok's smile didn't change, but something behind her eyes shifted just for a second. They flew to Jeju on a Friday morning. Ha-jun had wanted to come. Moon-Seok had convinced him otherwise. Let the women have time. You'll crowd it. We'll be back in 10 days. And he'd reluctantly agreed, kissing Catherina at the departure gate, one hand gentle on her stomach. Call me every night, he said. Every night, she promised. He held her face for a moment. You don't have to go if you don't want to. She almost said it then. Almost. I want to, she said. It'll be good. She believed, maybe, that she could survive 10 days. That maybe Moon-Seok meant some of it genuinely. That being present, being willing, might soften something. The first few days were actually fine. Jeju was stunning, more beautiful than any photograph had prepared her for. Black volcanic rock against turquoise water. Fields of yellow flowers that went all the way to the cliff edges. Sunsets that turned the whole sky coral and gold. She took pictures constantly, sent them to Hajun, to her mother, to Tabo, to Saifo, who replied with 17 fire emojis. Moon-Seok was pleasant, attentive, even. Uncle Cha Byung-ho was a big, loud man who laughed at everything and called Catherina our African daughter in a way that was clumsy but genuinely warm. His wife kept offering her food. She let herself relax. Maybe she thought. Maybe she'd been wrong about the woman. She hadn't been wrong. It was the 8th day. They were driving back from a coastal viewpoint to the hotel, the road winding through the interior of the island. It had rained heavily that morning, the kind of Jeju rain that came fast and left everything slick and gleaming. The road was wet. The sky was clearing, but the light was still gray. Their car, driven by driver Park Dae-hyun, a quiet man who'd been with the family for years, made a sound on the bridge. A wide bridge, long, that crossed a gorge about 40 feet above the road below, where trucks and vehicles moved steadily. The engine stuttered, coughed, died. Park Dae-hyun pulled to the side of the bridge and tried to restart it. Nothing. Everyone out. Moon-Seok said calmly. Give him room to work. They got out. The bridge surface was wet, not pooled, but slick in a way that was almost invisible. Catherina moved carefully, one hand on the railing, 8 months of pregnancy shifting her center of gravity in ways she was still adjusting to every day. The rail was metal, cold, slightly slippery with the rain. Uncle Byung-ho and his wife had walked further ahead. Madame Han stood near the car. Moon-Seok stood a few feet away, looking at her phone. Catherina moved along the railing slowly, carefully. Then her left foot went out from under her. It happened so fast. A sharp slip, both feet losing purchase on the wet surface, her body lurching sideways. She grabbed the rail with both hands and caught it, barely hanging half over the edge, feet scrambling for grip on the bridge ledge, heart crashing in her chest. Help! The word came out before she could think. Help me, please. She looked up. Moon-Seok was walking toward her. Slowly. No panic. No urgency. The kind of walk that already knew what it was going to do. She crouched down to Catherina's level, close enough that only Catherina could hear her. Took her hand, looked her in the eye, and smiled. Not a warm smile. Not a frightened smile. The other kind. The kind that had been hiding behind the warm ones for months. You were never good enough for my son, she said quietly, calmly, like she was commenting on the weather. A cleaning woman's daughter, from nowhere. You should never have been here. Catherina stared at her. Please, she whispered.
Help
The
me,
baby.
please. Don't
Moon-Seok let go. Just open her hand.
It's too
And
late
let
for
go.
that.
40 feet. The truck below was moving. It didn't stop in time. It didn't stop at all. The sound Moon-Seok
Help me,
made
please.
when she told
Don't
the
let
others was
go.
convincing. The tears that followed were
It's too late
convincing.
for that.
The story, she slipped, I tried to reach her, I couldn't get there in time, was consistent, repeated, devastatingly sad. They brought Catherina home to Hajun in a way no husband should ever receive his wife. Hajun did not make a sound when they told him. He stood in the entrance hall of their home, the same hall where she had once stood turning slowly, taking in the paintings and the flowers and the warm marble floors. And he just stood there, not moving, not speaking. Moon-Seok was beside him, watching Moon-Seok the way he watched everything, carefully, quietly filing things away. Something about her face wasn't right. The grief was there, but it sat wrong, like clothes that didn't quite fit. He'd spent 15 years reading people for a living, and something was wrong. He said nothing yet, but he started making calls that night. The street camera was mounted on a utility pole at the far end of the bridge, the kind of camera that monitored road conditions and traffic flow, the kind nobody thought about because it wasn't there for people, it was there for the road. Old equipment, grainy, but angled just right. It took Moon-Seok 4 days to find it, 2 more to get the footage through the right channels. He watched it alone first. Then he went to Ha-Jun. He didn't say anything. Just set up the laptop on the table in Ha-Jun's study, pressed play, and stood back. Ha-Jun watched it once, all the way through, without moving, without blinking that Moon-Seok could see. Then he watched it again. The room was very quiet. When it ended the second time, Ha-Jun reached over and slowly closed the laptop. He sat back in his chair. His hands were flat on the desk, completely still. Moon-Seok had seen this man in many situations over 15 years. He had seen him angry, tactical, cold, grieving, but he had never seen this particular stillness before. The kind that wasn't the absence of feeling, it was the presence of something so enormous that the body just went quiet to contain it. "My mother," Ha-Jun said, finally. His voice was even, almost soft. "Yes," Moon-Seok said. Ha-Jun nodded slowly. A long silence. "My daughter," he said, even softer. Moon-Seok said nothing. There was nothing to say. Ha-Jun stood up. He walked to the window, the same window Catherina used to stand at in the mornings, watching the garden, one hand always resting on her stomach, talking to the baby about what they could see outside. He stood exactly where she used to stand. She told her she wasn't good enough. He said, it wasn't a question. The footage had no audio, but the lip reader Moon-Seok had brought in had confirmed it that morning. Those were her last words to my wife. He stood there for a very long time. When he turned around, his face had settled into something that Moon-Seok recognized. Not rage. Rage was loud and hot and made mistakes. This was the other thing. The cold, clear, permanent thing that didn't shout and didn't rush and didn't forgive. She will answer for this, he said quietly. Not to the law, not to anyone else. To me. Moon-Seok nodded once. And Moon-Seok, Ha-Jun said, already moving toward the door. She does not get to cry at the funeral. She does not get to stand at the graveside. She does not get to say one word about my wife or my daughter in public or in private. Not one word. Understood, Moon-Seok said. Ha-Jun stopped at the door. Didn't turn around. She let go of her hand. He said, quietly, like he was saying it to hear it out loud one time, to make it real, to make sure he never let himself soften on it. She let go of her hand. Then he walked out. Cha Moon-Seok, who had spent 40 years building a family name and a legacy and a reputation as a woman of grace and power, had no idea that a single street camera had been running that whole time. She would find out soon. And the Mafia boss who had never, in all his complicated life, turned the full weight of his world against someone he loved, was about to show his mother exactly what that weight felt like. Some things, once broken, do not get repaired. Some betrayals live in a category all their own, beyond anger, beyond hurt, beyond the reach of any apology. A mother let go of her son's wife's hand on a bridge in Jeju, and her son never forgave her. Not ever. And that's where we leave it today. If this story hit you the way I think it did, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do that right now. It genuinely helps this channel more than you know. Drop in the comments where you're watching from. I mean it. I read every single one. And thank you, truly, for sitting with this story all the way to the end.